Buonasera. Okay, I won't continue Italian, but anyway, it's fine. So I'm Paolo Ciarrocca. Don't try to remember how you pronounce it. Nobody can do it, not even my wife. Don't tell her that, but that's fine. So I work as lead application developer, UR Digital. You can't quite read the digital there, but that's fine. You can hear. We're a digital agency company with offices in Edinburgh and Cardiff. We mainly do SEO, analytics, social, and design and build, which is what I do. Lead applications developer means that I build web applications and websites, and this involves working and interacting and building APIs. So I guess that's why they chose me to talk here. So let's start at the beginning. What are APIs? What API stands for is irrelevant, kind of, mostly, unless you're on University Challenge. You can look it up on Wikipedia if you want to later. The important thing, you can kind of think about as APIs, the whole ecosystem of APIs as a restaurant. So you get the menu, which is your documentation, which is arguably the most important part, because without documentation, you become bold like me, working with APIs. And so that's the documentation. You look what you want, what is available, and then you have to know how to ask for it. And that's where being a developer and knowing programming languages is the part. And that's the important part. Because if you don't ask properly, you might be kicked out, or who knows, you're rude to the waiter, you might get, who knows what you get in your food. The waiter is the API kind of protocol itself, which goes and fetches the stuff for you. And the kitchen is the provider. You might have some idea of what is in the kitchen, what ingredients are in the food, but you don't really know or really care, because probably you don't even want to know what goes on in a restaurant kitchen, really. How it's done, you just want to know what you want. And that's pretty much what APIs are. If some of you already interacted with APIs without knowing it, just without developing. So if you've ever embedded a Google image or a Google map in a website, in a blog or whatever, that's an API call. It's calling like the Google Maps API, that's all it's doing. Or if you use if this then that whole system is built on APIs. Without APIs, that would not exist, would cease to exist. If you've come across and worked with APIs, you've probably heard the term REST or RESTful API. And these are mainly this is going to be the type of API that I'm going to be talking about tonight. This is because REST is basically the default standard now for APIs, pretty much. Only idiots would not use REST now, really, because developers like myself would not want to use it. We would choose something, an alternative, if available, or write something ourselves, because that's just how we roll. So what is a RESTful API? Again, it's another acronym. Again, you can look it up on Wikipedia later. A RESTful API, the cool thing about it is that it's built on top of HTTP, which is the main protocol on which the web is built. So that's kind of cool from a developer's point of view. It makes it kind of easier to develop and everything and interact with. And then there's another good part of it is that it is so-called stateless. So every time you interact with it, there is no history. It doesn't care what you just asked it 2 minutes ago or 2 milliseconds ago, really. It doesn't matter. There is no history. It's just each time you ask a question, it's that question, and that's the only answer. The history of it does not exist, which is good. Sometimes it can be like you'd wish that it would remember stuff, but that's the job as a developer. If you're interacting with an API, that's your job to get different types of information, putting it together, and doing something with it. And basically, seeing that it's built on the HTTP protocol, that's how you interact there. Because basically, with a RESTful API, you're either getting something, so you're trying to get something, which is the HTTP GET method, or you're trying to create something, which is the POST method, or you're trying to update something which already exists, which is the put method, or you're trying to delete something, which is the delete method, obviously, kind of obvious one. So what are the building blocks of an API call, an API interaction? They're basically pretty much 4 of them. They apply generally to most of them, but there are variations and different APIs on what happens and how they're done, but I'll go through those just now. So the first one is what is called the base URI or the endpoint, which is pretty much just a URL. Mainly done in that kind of format, roughly. They vary, whatever. The last bit is like a version number. A lot of them have version numbers, so you know which one you're using. So for example, Twitter are discontinuing the version 1 of their API. I think, at the end of this month, at the beginning of May. So loads of people's websites will suddenly break and their Twitter widget includes or whatever on their websites will completely cease to work, and they'll get nice error messages. Then you have a method. So basically, what is it that you want? It's the menu item. It's like, I want a burger, I want a cheeseburger. That's pretty much what the method is. What they are, what they look like varies, and that's why documentation is important. You have to know what the language is for that API, what is it that you want, and what comes back, also importantly. Methods have parameters, which specifies more what you want. So it's kind of like going, hold, on your pizza, hold the olives, extra pepperoni, kind of thing. So say if you're like getting visits, you want to look at the visits to a website, like on Google Analytics, you have the start and an end date for the period. So that's like the parameter. You tell me, I want it from the 1st of March to the 31st of March. That's when I want the information, and there's all other stuff. Parameters doesn't make sure there's either like they are required, so you have to put them in, you have to put something in them, in methods. So one method would say like, I have 2, 3 required parameters that you have to pass on, or you have optional ones, or a mixture of required and optionals, or there's some methods which have none. So for example, if you're using some sort of CRM system and you just want to get a list of users, it's just list all users or get users or whatever, you just get a list. You don't have to pass any parameters. And the last bit is the format, which is how do you want it back? What language do you want it back? Now in REST APIs, the 2 main formats are JSON and XML. If you work in SEO, probably you're a bit more familiar with XML, probably come across it. JSON, probably you've heard of it maybe. The J stands for JavaScript. It comes from JavaScript. It is not JavaScript itself, though. Tends to be more and more, currently, the more XML APIs which do XML. Quite a lot of them do both. But JSON is the preferred for people like me because it's easier to interact with. It's a bit more human readable as well, which you'll see because all the examples that I've done are in JSON format. I'm not showing you XML because screw that. So how do you gain access to an API? So not all APIs, unfortunately, access in the same way. They've all got different variations, and that's a bugbear, but that's part of the setup process, which you need to look up in the documentation pretty much. It's all about documentation. So you either have no authentication, which is pretty much exclusively for GET operations, so you're asking for something back, you're not sending anything. So that's pretty simple, and normally, these ones you can just, even to test it out, you can just put it in the address bar of your URL, and you just get like the information back right there as a web page. Well, not as a web page, just like a stream of text or some XML, like if you went to, even to look at like an RSS feed. RSS is a form of XML, and that's kind of like an API, the RSS feed in your blog. Then you got authentication. Authentication, obviously, is for sending data, but it's obvious why API providers want to have authentication because they want to know who you are, they want to log who's doing what, when errors occur, track what people are doing, for charging purposes, if you're over your quota or whatever. So for example, Google, a lot of their APIs, there's a limit or free quote of how much you can use it, and then after that, they start asking you for money. So the first form of authentication is key or client ID. You might have heard of it. Normally, it's some encoded gobbledygook, string, like, those long passwords that you get, automated passwords, kind of similar kind of format like that. You can either just that you pass it on just as is, or you're going to have to do some manipulation, do something with it before you can send it across. You have to do some encoding or something. I won't go into that because that's complicated. Normally, it tells you anyway in the documentation again. Next thing, less common nowadays, is just a username and password. This would always need some sort of manipulation before you send it across, but it's less frequent. Then another one which you might have probably heard is OAuth, which is a pain to set up and interact with, but it is what is gaining to be like the most popular way to do it. It's also what your login with Facebook or login with Twitter and so forth use to authenticate. And what you do, if you go on twitter.com, you saw your authorized apps, those are all authorized via OAuth. So that's pretty much what that one is. So we'll get some code. Well, not really, but we'll go with a simple example, which I use the Spotify web API found out that they had one, decided to use it, which is kind of simple. We're just doing a GET request. It's unauthenticated, so you can use it anytime. So first, let's go through the building blocks that I mentioned before. So that's going to be the endpoint, so kind of similar to roughly to that example one that I said. So that's where we're going, where we're asking stuff from. This is the method. So we're searching for an artist. Parameter is Q, query, what artist we're looking for. And then finally, we're telling it what format are we wanting, JSON, like I said earlier. So that's what it looks like, just a URL, simply. So like I said, you could put this just in your browser. You get some information back. The information you get looks like that. That's JSON. This is kind of, you can't really read it there now, I realize, but it's kind of human readable. You know, you can see that's divided into artists. There's an href to Spotify, the name of the artist, how popular it is. Apparently, there's a karaoke Foo Fighters band on Spotify. So this is not super practical, this maybe, but you know, that's basically a simple and authenticated request, and that's roughly how it looked like. What is important to know, what I said before, that you have to know, read the documentation, know what the API returns, is that how that result, how it's structured, you don't know it beforehand. You have to read the documentation, know how it's done, so then you know how to get information from it, how you get the href for each artist, or so forth. So let's escalate a little bit to something a little bit more complicated. So this is going to be an example with the Google custom search API. One thing to note about the Google APIs, that it's some of the most complicated to set up. There's loads of steps, so it's not super simple. Also, this example is no longer live because I had to set up like a custom search for a website. So I did it for this, and then I deleted it, so it's no longer there. So you can't use the example in the slides. You're going to have to roll your own if you're interested. So I just went on, I created a search engine for searchengineland.com. Seemed appropriate given the audience. And search for panda. Again, appropriate, seemed for the audience. So that's the request. So like I said, no longer act. Oh, okay, you can't really see it. Damn. Code highlight. Anyway, that's my next bit. Right. What you would see. Yeah?
The presentations will be online after. So.
Well, this one is already online, but yeah, that's fine. So what you would notice, if you could read it, is that it doesn't have all the parts that I mentioned before. So it doesn't have a method because the custom search API only has one function, searching. So you don't have to tell it what you want. It already knows what the hell you want. You want to search. So there's no point to specify that. It doesn't have any format specified because it has a default format. Like most APIs actually have a default format. And this is JSON, so that's fine. So I didn't have to specify it. And so it only has 3 parameters, one of them being the key. So it does have a key, and this is just like a plain text key. I didn't have to do any operations with it. I just had to get it when I signed up, and that was it. So if you call it, you probably won't be able to read this either, but that's pretty friggin' long. It's a bit more complex, so it has like some so-called metadata about what you searched and what you did, and then eventually it comes to like the different pages on Search Engine Land about it. Pity you can't read it, but that's fine. And that is pretty much close to being it. So I rattled through that. There's some resources, so links to the 2 APIs I used. API Hub and Programmable Web, those are API repositories where you can search for APIs for specific tasks, do mashups, whatever, hack around. The only note of warning is that they've been going around, especially Programmable Web, for quite some time. And the APIs are user submitted, so they could have been submitted like in 2006. So it could be that the API doesn't work anymore, everything's changed or it's discontinued. You know, your mileage might vary on what you find there, but it's a great starting point. And then finally, if you're kind of interested in digging a little bit deeper than what I've done tonight, there's Code Academy, online learning specifically for coding. You know, it was the year of people learning to code. I think in 2012 it was, or whatever. They tried to push that. So they have a specific API track. So you can learn more. I think there's interactions with the YouTube API and other ones. I think Twitter one, maybe not, because it constantly changes. That's pretty much it. Grazie.